Thank you. Okay, yes. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me here. With no doubt, I'm the speaker who speaks English the worst, so I beg your pardon right now, and we'll see how it goes. So anyway, today we are going to talk about morphophysiology and how we can apply this in veterinary management. And hopefully we get in time to present 2 case studies. So first, we need to introduce some terms. And probably the most important term of today for my presentation is the word form. So what's the form? The tree form is the plastic, dynamic, and transient expression of the relationship between the individual and the context. The study of the form allows us to outline the past of a tree, to describe its present, and to foresee the future by placing in morphological and functional relation its different anatomical regions in a logical and consequential way. So the tree form is a language, or rather, the expressive form of its identity. So the tree is its form, and this is the basic of the presentation, actually. But when we talk about form, we also talk about anatomy, morphology, and architecture. So we can think that form is a dynamic phenomenon, a dynamic process. So it means that the tree changes the form in time constantly and during all its life. So on the left, you can see oaks, but you all can see that the form is different. We have acorns, a young oak, an adult oak, and a beautiful veteran oak, and it's a Ted Green photograph. So when we want to study the form of a tree, we have to face some issues, some troubles. And why? Because during time, the tree, as we said, changes constantly because it wants to occupy the space around it. It wants to colonize the environment. And doing this, it changes. And we call these changes the organization of the tree, the structure of the tree changes. And so we call this development. So time is our first problem. In this slide, you see a lime tree in the middle. You have 2 old people in 1990. And then the same tree in 2008 with 2 children and a dog. And then in 2015, the children became teenagers. The dog was a little bit older and whiter. So probably the people in the middle, or in the first picture, maybe passed away already. But if you look at the tree is exactly the same. So we can spend all our life observing a tree, an individual tree, trying to get some changes, and it does not change. So how can we study the changing in time of a tree? So this is the first problem. And the second one is space and organization. If you take away the people here, you have here, or here, or here. It's very hard to say if this tree is very big or not, and how tall or high it is. Because the proportions between the different anatomic parts of the tree stands the same during the life of the tree. So it's very hard to understand how it changes. So again, another problem we have to face. And in this slide, it's even clearer because you see Hyperion, maybe one of the tallest, or maybe the tallest tree, or highest, I don't know which word you would say for a tree, tall or high, I don't know. So I use both. And so this tree is probably the highest tree, 115 meters and more, and it is 2,400 years old. But on the other side, you have Old Tico, and this tree is 5 meters high, but it is more than 9,500 years old. So it means that there is not a strict correlation between size, time, and organization of the tree. So how can we do if we want to study the form of a tree? Then maybe a key is modularity. We have not enough time to go really in the deep of this term, but I can tell you that we have different kinds of modularities: self-modularity, redundancy, substitutability, subtraction, and resilience. And so we go a little bit further to understand our tree and the form of the trees. And first, talking about modularity, we can say that the primary growth is the first level of modularity, because phytomeres can represent the first level of modularity. So in the primary growth, you have the adding of phytomeres for the elongation of a part of a tree. But also, rings can be an element of modularity. And of course, to describe a tree, the primary growth is not enough. So we have the secondary growth. And here you see the pith, the primary growth, and the secondary growth. So this is, another step to understand trees. But to understand it, to be clearer, we can also look at this beautiful, for me, beautiful sculpture. There is a sculpture that an artist that likes to find a specific tree inside a log of a timber log. So it carves the log and finds a specific year of the life of that tree. And we can say that the old tree is embedded in the tree of nowadays, or maybe the young tree is embedded in the old tree. So when we want to talk about secondary growth, we talk about rings. But maybe we can do better if we think that these are not just rings, but they are like gloves or casts that grows every year on, because of the cambium, vascular cambium, on the tree of the year before. So if we ask, is this oak, how old is this oak? Is 200 years old? Yes. 140, 100 years old? 1 year old? Yes, both. The three of them, all of them. It's a young tree, it's an old tree at the same time. So we have to keep in mind these differences when we want to interact with trees and maybe prune them. But to describe the real trees, we need another concept. And this concept is branching. Yeah, because there are not only vertical stems in a tree, but there are also branches to have a full crown, as we can see outside. So at a certain point, the tree developed from a lateral bud a branch. And you can see that is already decided in the primary growth, because the secondary growth is a consequence of the primary growth. And then, as I said, at a certain point, a branch can develop. How does it work? There is a hormonal balance in a tree. So at the beginning, the tree wants to build up the stem, the main stem. There is a very strong apical dominance. And only at a certain point, when this lateral bud is far away enough from the main apex, this bud can develop, because there is a balance between auxin and cytokinins produced by the root system. So this process continues during the whole life of the tree, and then we have many branches. So every branch has its own apex. And I think a crown as an orchestra, because every apex produces its own auxins, and then it's a language, a dialogue. So it's a sort of concert between all these producing auxins by every apex. And in my opinion, this is the way the tree is able to get its self-awareness. So he knows about itself. And of course, as I said, some parts of the tree, like these, get to an independent state because this apex is dominating to the others. And some other apexes are still partially dominated hormonally. And so these parts will be trunks, while these parts will stay in a branch state. And a trunk is symmetrically has a radiated symmetry, so the buds can develop all around, while the branch will develop twigs or little branches only on a prevailing plane. And depending on the plane, of course, can be this one or this one, then we can define the different kind of branches. Again, we have no time, but you have to think about this when you prune a tree. It's an hypotony or epitony or amphitony or so on. So this is quite important in the application of the morphophysiological approach. And in a dynamic framework, of course, a branch can become evolving, can become a trunk, and vice versa. So it's a very dynamic process during the life of the tree. And here is even clearer, probably. Here you have different kind of branches. Okay, this one is like here. And so in reality, you would see this one. And this is another kind of branch we will call later on partial reiterations. And when we will see this kind of branch like this, we will call total reiterations. So the branch like this will develop colors, while this one won't. But sometimes a branch develops a stipe and a cambial column. And the cambial column goes along the main stem, reaching the bottom part and reaching the fasciculated, I call them fasciculated or lateral superficial roots. And so this is another trunk then. It's not anymore a branch. And also the fourth type is apicormic sprout. So thanks to Francis Allais and other botanists, we know already that there are 22, 24 architectural models. So what are those? Those are the predetermined matter of combining trees and trunks and branches in trees. So the main parts of trees, and these are predetermined manners. And there are only 24 on our Earth. And in this slide, you can see the 7 architectural model which represents the native species of temperate regions, only 7. And so you can see this later here. If we take an example, we can take the plane tree. We know that plane tree is a Massard model. And when the tree is very young, it looks very much like the model. But if you go outside, you don't see trees like this. So to study the form, to understand the form of a tree, we have to look at it during time. And so at the beginning, the unit will add some parts of the unit, so some branches. And we call this new parts partial reiteration. So the tree, the strategy is to amplify the architectural unit. The architectural unit is exactly the same of the model. But at a certain point, the tree will add a complete, architectural unit on itself. So it's not just a part of it, but a total architectural unit. And these are total reiterations, and this process is the multiplication of the architectural unit. And this process goes on for the rest of the life of the tree, but how? Every time, more and more frequently, and the architectural units that are added at the end, in later stages like adult and mature, these are smaller and smaller. So this is sort of miniaturization of the process. And so now we get maybe to a closer drawing of a real tree. And, but trees have two kinds of strategies for the use of the reiterations. For example, a Norway spruce will grow looking for the amplification of the architectural unit. And very late, at very late time of the life of the tree, will develop total reiterations. This strategy is called gigantism, or as Francis said, these trees are Unitarian. But on the other side, you have oaks that very early develop total reiterations. And you can see them in red circles, smaller and smaller, and more frequently and more frequently during the life of the tree. And we call these trees polyarchic trees. So today we are focusing more on these trees more than the giants one. But anyway, this is a Habeas alba fir, and you can see easily by the drawing how it grows. And again here, a maple tree, and the red dots are the points of the development of total reiterations. So we go a little bit further to understand the form of a tree, and we have to introduce another concept, because during the life, tree, as we saw, adds parts, but also loses parts. So we call this loss of parts subtractive growth. So it's a growth because it grows, because it colonizes the environment, but differently. So again, we go back to our plane tree, and to understand it better, we need to add this concept, the subtractive growth. So the mortality of parts that were added once. So the mortality can be acropetal, yeah? So there is the loss of the bottom branches, can be centrifugal, it can be centripetal, we can have the heartwood formation or the cavitation of the trunks. And in reality, you know very well this process. It can be every year, so twigs or little branches or foliage or leaves, because the goal for the subtractive growth is to optimize the shape and the organization of the different parts of the tree through time, as it cannot move or change its clothes or whatever. So the tree has to adapt itself differently from an animal. So we saw, we said already, a heartwood formation or cavitation, and this is a very good example. It's a plane tree in Padua Botanic Garden. It was planted in 1680, and already in the 900 and the 19th century, we already had this tree partially hollow here. In 1926, it was already completely hollow, and more in 1963, and how it is today. Is this cavity a problem for this tree? I would not say so. It stands at least the last 2 centuries the same in perfect conditions. So there is quite a different way of seeing the cavitations, and we will talk more later. So we get to morphophysiology. morphophysiology is, just check my time. Yeah. So morphophysiology is the way, it's a key, it's a way to read the tree. The tree leaves a dynamic balance. We can say that the form is an expression of this dynamic balance. We can talk about energy balance, hormonal balance, or mechanical balance. Of course, the tree does not divide into three types, but it can feel, of course, it helps us to understand the tree better. So, according with a French researcher, Pierre Rimbaud, we can divide the stages of a life of a tree in 5 phases and 10 stages. And these tree balances affect or have primacy differently during the life of a tree. In the early stages, we can say that the hormonal balance would be the most important and would affect the tree the most. Of course, the stages will describe the crown, but also the root system, the early stages and then later on. And in the adult stage or the adult phase, the tree is more concerned on mechanical issues. And the mechanical balance is the most important. The tree is full of energy, ready to occupy the environment around, but it has to withstand environmental threats. So this is the primacy of the mechanical balance. But in late stages, and many veteran trees are in these stages, like 9 or 10, then you can see that the tree can be described as these drawings, and the energy balance is the most important. And it's a very delicate, sensitive phase, and the tree can be very fragile. So because we easily have a lack of energy. Of course, this theory is not that strict, because we can have stages with variable durations. They are not 50 years each or so. We can have some stages that cannot be completed, jumps of stages with traumas, or also regressions of stages. So it's very dynamic. Again, it's a very, it's not just a very strict theory or very how can I say, rigid theory. I said that Pierre studied the crown and relation between the crown with the root system. Well, what we did, Giovanni and I, is to study the stem in this framework. And if you look at the stem, in early stages, it's like a cylinder. And after a while, as we said, some branches develop. Going further in the stage of development of the tree, some branches develop cambial columns, or at least buttresses and stipes. And there is the heartwood formation. Going further, real cambial columns are produced, and usually the trunk is hollow, and some cambial bridges appear connecting the different cambial columns. And at the end, in very late stages, you have this kind of tree, so completely hollow, the taproot is gone, decayed and disappeared, superficial roots. And if you look at this new parts, the newest part of the tree, they are exactly the same as this, because the tree is 200 years old and 1 year old at the same time. So again, the strategy must be the same. And it is, if you go to real trees, is exactly as I said. And if we look at the lime tree, of the beginning, you can see what I talked about. Cambial columns, you can easily see them. Cambial bridges here. Inside you get adventitious roots. And newest part here. Because if you look at this tree, there are only alive tissues. The decayed went, did its job, and is gone. So no more decay, only alive tissues on this tree. And more, you can see here, the vascular cambium had the opportunity to introflect inside the tree. So every year, it produces 2 layers, not 2 layers, but on 2 sides, wood. So it would thicken much quicker. Oh. And here you have this process. You can see in this case. And here you have adventitious roots. And talking about this opportunity that some trees have to introflect the vascular cambium layer, we studied a pagoda tree in Padua, in beautiful central area with 250 years old pagoda trees. And in this case, we used the tomograph, and we studied the tree at 3 different heights from the ground. And in 2009, you can see there was a huge cavity. But when we went back in 2014, the cavity was reducing. And you can easily see the cambial columns at the different heights of the tree, because we measured here, here, and up here. And again, we can be helped by this slide. It's a mulberry, and there is no decay left. These are trunks, cambial columns. But here, between them, the vascular cambium had the opportunity to refill the tree, and as it did here. So it's very, very interesting, because the tree can be filled up again in time. So when we deal with trees, we talk about defects. And inspired by the National Tree Safety Group, with Giovanni, we said a defect represents any kind of negative difference compared to a perceived norm. A structural defect for a specific context of growth represents any architectural, morphological, anatomical, environmental anomaly able to increase the likelihood of failure. So we have to deal with trees that are not exactly as the ideal model. They had to adapt. So they used adaptive modifications, corrective modification, reparative modification, facing the different issues and threats of the environment during time. So again, this tree is very well known. Everybody wanted to take a picture in front of it, and for decades and centuries, it was like this. So can we say that the cavity was a problem for this tree? I doubt. I doubt, because it does not seem so. But is this tree lucky? Why we have only this tree, or few of them, with such a big cavity? In my opinion, is because we cut them too early. So we have not the chance to bring them at this stage. So we are very scared about cavities. Yes, and so in my opinion, it's in a strategy, a good, positive strategy, many times for the tree. And we know about the TR ratio, but we can say that this method that is very good for young or adult trees would not be that as good as veteran trees. So if we want to study, also from a mechanical point of view, the veteran or the old trees, at least, and as the tree in late stages are more like this, we better use other tools. And that's why I'm talking to you about morphophysiology, because it's another tool that arborists can have looking at old trees. So here, for example, we have a lime tree. Somebody decided to remove it. But if you observe it, we had buttresses. Of course, there was Ganoderma working hard and very good in a very good position, because already there was a huge cavity. But also, we had nice sound cambial columns. So maybe this tree was not to remove, but maybe we could give it another chance. So again, looking at the stem, we can say, as already said here, the young stages are like this, and if we want really describe as a model, as a geometrical model, we can say it's more like a Roman column. And then at this stage, we have the first formation of cambial columns. Maybe it's a Gothic column. And later on, with the heartwood formation, then the cavitation, and the production of cambial bridges, and here even stronger, we can maybe think it's a Eiffel Tower shape, Eiffel Tower model. So are we scared to take a lift and go up to the Eiffel Tower? No. So there is no reason to be scared of this model for trees. And so when we are consultants and we approach a tree with a huge cavity maybe, and we have all our tools, the electronic drill, the tomograph, the pulling test, and we assess with no doubt that there is a huge cavity inside, in my opinion, we also should think, is this tree at stage maybe 7 or maybe 8? Because from following and according with the theory, if it is adult and with this, at this phase of its life, it should not be cave. So maybe this cavitation, this hollow part, can be a problem from a mechanical point of view. Maybe it's something pathological. But if we know that the tree is already at this stage, well, it's physiology. It must be like this. Otherwise, it's not a tree. So it's another tool to better understand the tree that we are assessing. So now I would like to talk a little bit about 2 case studies. And the first one is a London plane tree in Milan. You can see here the climber with the red jacket. So it's quite a huge one. We said that it's a Massar model. It's a mature stage. So we think that the development should be like this, the ontogenic development, and the model should be like this. So I think that maybe I will find a tree like this one. And actually, drawing the real tree, I can assess there is a huge cavity. Giovanni went inside and looked. I could see the sky up on there. So it was really a cave. And we can say it is at end of stage 8, following the Pierre Rimbaud stages, or beginning of 9. And so, as we know that there is a strict relationship between the crown and the root system, we also can guess that it's at the stage H. So we know taproots, secondary taproots, and many superficial roots. We could see epicomic sprouts, and it's a little bit bending. So the municipality of Milan asked us to assess the tree with the electronic tools. So we used the electronic drill and also the tomograph, and also we The tomograph was at 75 centimeters high, and also we pulled the tree. And from the pulling test, we got some features, some numbers, and the tree is over the safety factor, the threshold, but we also have different numbers. And this is, I can explain this looking at this other slide, because depending on where the instruments, the sensor were, we got different numbers. For example, the lowest breaking stability safety factor was here, and we got the same here, while the lowest tipping stability safety factor, we got it here. And so you can see the same areas on the real tree, and this is where the thinnest alive tissues were. At the same time, you can see easily where the cambial columns were, and you can see them also on the tree. And if we draw them better on the photograph, we see them clearly with cambial bridges connecting them, and on a cross-section, we can say that these are very much like this. So, in my opinion, they are very much like an Eiffel Tower shape. Only 5 minutes left, yes? Okay. So, in my opinion, morphophysiology, the morphophysiological approach was very useful, because from a visual assessment, we could already say many things about this tree, yes, and you can also see the numbers here connecting to the drawings. Okay, maybe we go back to this one if we have time later on, because it's a quite complex case. But I want to talk to you about another interesting case. It's hackberry, Celtis australis. I don't want to talk about pines today. Someone knows why? Well, this is hackberry tree, well known, beloved by the population of the citizens of this nice village. Historically, we have maps that are talking to us about this tree, and so in many years, maybe exactly the same specimens, maybe the same individual tree, or maybe not. But in any case, for centuries, they had this hackberry tree planted here. So what happened one day? One day, this part was falling down, and it started to fall. And immediately, people called us, and with some climbers, we had the opportunity to rope it temporarily, just to see how we could help the tree. The first thing we observed, it was that in that area where the crack and the falling was, the breakage was occurring, there were no cambial bridges. So why? Because we had a lot of cambial columns. Because a long time before, the tree was topped. And from a topping section, you have only new trunks, no branches, new trunks growing up. And the trunks wants to go down, forming a cambial column, reaching the root system, and be independent. That's the nature of trunks. So this is not a natural evolution of the tree. It's traumatic. And the consequences lead to a breakage many, many years after. So we again checked the tree. There was a huge, very huge cavity. And so I spent my last 2 minutes talking about this aspect. So the tree needed some mitigation, some expensive mitigation. Cables structures and monitoring pruning plan, long-term pruning plan, and long-term monitoring of the stability of the tree, and so on. So many expenses for the community. So the mayor decided to make a meeting, organize a meeting with the citizens, and ask them, I have some money left for renewing sidewalks. Would you prefer to renew the sidewalks, or you would like to save and keep the tree? And after a big reunion with big discussions, they decide to keep the tree. So it was very nice, because this is the social side of morphophysiology, in my opinion. And here you can see certified arborists, very skilled, working on this tree, putting on cables. Here, the pruning plan, and maybe, and also we grafted some twigs, hoping for artificial cambial bridges. Maybe some of these grafts made in a cross shape maybe will survive and so help the tree. So we monitor it every year, and people are very happy. And maybe one day we'll be able, or even to take away the cables, because the tree will be completely safe and stable. So I don't know about time, but red light. Oh. So again, I can stop here, because I think I gave you just a little touch of morphophysiology. Thank you.